General Hospital spoilers reveal that when Willow Kane brought Drew home, it marked far more than a simple transfer of care. It signaled the beginning of a new phase in her transformation, a chilling escalation in the quiet power she had seized. The house, once a symbol of safety and family, now felt like a trap carefully designed by the woman who had mastered the art of appearing gentle, while hiding a storm beneath her skin. For Willow, bringing Drew home was not an act of compassion, it was a calculated adjustment, another step in her growing obsession with control, dominance, and the twisted belief that she was finally reclaiming the life she believed Drew had stolen from her. Drew, trapped in a body that refused to respond, could feel the shift immediately. The moment Willow closed the front door behind them, he sensed the atmosphere thick and heavy, suffocating, charged with an undertone of malice she no longer bothered to hide. She moved with an unsettling calmness, her voice soft but stripped of warmth, the way someone might speak to a pet rather than a man who once walked, breathed, and fought beside her. The medical equipment she arranged around him was less about assisting his recovery, and more about reinforcing his imprisonment. Every tube, every monitor, every restraint disguised as a supportive strap served the same purpose, ensuring Drew remained powerless, silent, and fully in her grasp. The terrifying truth was that Willow didn't want him to recover. She wanted him like this, unable to speak, unable to warn anyone, unable to escape the horrors she was slowly unveiling. And with each passing hour, Drew realized he wasn't just injured, he was being kept. Willow hovered over him with an intensity that bordered on obsessive, her eyes studying him not with concern but with fascination, as though she were examining the consequences of her own cruelty. She whispered to him at night, leaning close enough that he could feel her breath against his skin, sweet, steady, and utterly devoid of remorse. She told him how peaceful things were now that he couldn't cause problems anymore. She told him how ironic it was that a few milliliters of liquid in a syringe had accomplished what years of fate, chaos, and circumstance could not. And then she would smile, soft, serene, chilling. Drew had never known true fear until he became a captive in his own home, forced to lie helplessly while Willow crafted her new reality around him. What made it even worse was how normal she made everything look. To outsiders, Willow seemed like a devoted wife caring for a gravely injured man. She kept the house spotless, spoke politely to the nurses who visited, nodded respectfully to Michael whenever he appeared on the doorstep. No one saw the shift in her eyes the moment the door closed behind them. No one heard the venom hidden in her sweetness when she leaned in close to Drew and reminded him that he owed his entire fate to her. The adjustment, the word she often repeated to herself, was becoming her guiding principle, a mantra that justified every dangerous impulse. She had adjusted her marriage, adjusted her morality, adjusted the fate of anyone who dared threaten the life she believed she deserved. And now she was adjusting Drew's destiny, piece by piece, breath by breath. Drew's mind raced constantly, trapped between panic and helpless fury. He remembered the moment she plunged the syringe into him, the coldness in her voice as she murmured something he couldn't fully recall, the terrifying stillness that spread through his limbs before darkness swallowed him whole. That memory haunted him in waves, returning each time Willow placed her hand on his chest to reassure him or brushed his hair aside. With eerie tenderness, and Willow, fully aware that he remembered, found new delight in torturing him with reminders. She would sit beside the bed, speaking in honeyed whispers about how accidents happen, how some people never recover, how certain outcomes are better for everyone involved. She reminded him that the doctors didn't expect improvement. She reminded him he couldn't speak to expose her. She reminded him he couldn't stop her from deciding whatever came next. Each word settled into Drew like shards of ice, making him realize that this was no temporary nightmare. This was the new reality she had crafted. Willow had become obsessed with control in a way that defied reason. Her resentment toward Drew had evolved into something darker, a need to dominate him completely. And now that she had succeeded in immobilizing him, her obsession expanded, twisting into curiosity about how far she could push him, before his mind cracked under the weight of fear and helplessness. This was Willow's new territory, unchallenged, unchecked, and dangerously intoxicating. For Drew, every minute alone with her became a psychological battlefield. He could do nothing but watch as Willow paced the room, muttering plans under her breath, refining her next steps, plotting how to ensure that no one, neither Jason nor Michael, nor any investigator ever discovered the truth. She believed she was untouchable. She believed she had outsmarted the world. And worst of all, she believed Drew was no longer a person, but a symbol of everything she had survived and everything she now intended to conquer. The new obsession forming within Drew wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. If he couldn't move, he could observe. If he couldn't speak, he could think. If he couldn't escape, he could wait. Because Drew knew something Willow had yet to consider. A mind pushed to the edge does not die, it adapts. And behind his frozen expression, Drew began planning, praying for the smallest opening, waiting for the tiniest mistake Willow might make. She believed she had full control. She believed she had crafted a perfect prison. But Drew, despite the terror coiling inside him, felt a spark of defiance beginning to burn. One day, maybe in a moment she never saw coming, he would make her regret, believing he was already defeated. Because as terrifying as Willow's new adjustments were, she had underestimated one thing: even the most trapped man is still capable of fighting back. Willow moved through the dimly lit bedroom with a quiet certainty that had long replaced the hesitation she once carried. Her steps soft against the hardwood floor as she approached the motionless figure trapped in the bed. Drew's eyes followed her, the only part of him still capable of movement, and the sheer terror inside them fed something dark and sharpened inside her. She leaned in close enough for him to feel the whisper of her breath, letting him absorb every word as she suggested that he should pray, truly pray, that he never recovers fully, that he never again lifts his head or finds his voice, because if he does, she will make sure he never speaks a second time. There was no tremor in her voice, no flicker of remorse, only a terrifying calm that seemed to deepen each time she looked at him. She knew the doctors believed any meaningful recovery was impossible, and in that medical pessimism she saw sanctuary, a protective wall that allowed her to craft the narrative exactly the way she wanted. Drew, trapped in silence, forced to endure her presence without the ability to recoil, had become both her captive audience and her living trophy. Willow fed on the power dynamic like oxygen, adjusting pillows, checking machines, pretending to care even as she tightened her control with invisible chains he could never break. Each time she held an empty syringe, turning it slowly between her fingers as if remembering the moment she shattered his life. Drew felt the echo of the original stroke tightening around his bones, and Willow saw that recognition in his eyes, a silent scream begging anyone to intervene. Though he knew no one would, Willow had convinced the world that she was exhausted, grieving, overwhelmed by responsibility, and people believed her because it was easier to accept the version of her they knew than to confront the possibility that she had crossed into something monstrous. Even Nina, whose instincts had sharpened after years of betrayal and loss, failed to see the shadow beneath Willow's soft-spoken words. Michael, distracted by his relationship with Jacinda and his own emotional chaos, rarely noticed the subtle shifts in Willow's voice, or the coldness that sometimes flickered in her eyes. Jason remained the greatest threat, but even he seemed trapped in his own moral confusion, torn between the logic that something was wrong and the loyalty that made him hesitate to turn suspicion into action. Willow understood all of this, studied each of them like a strategist preparing for war, and with each passing day she felt more confident that the world was still blind to the transformation she had undergone. But inside that confidence lay a growing desperation, because no matter how carefully she tried to bury it, Drew remained the one person who knew the truth. He had lived the truth. He had felt the truth tear through his nerves and leave him paralyzed. And in Willow's mind, that made him the single greatest risk to everything she was fighting for, including her plan to reclaim Wiley and Amelia. She believed she deserved her children, believed fate had been cruel to her, and she had every right to bend the world until it gave her back what she had lost. Yet the more Willow tried to tighten her grip on the situation, the more cracks began to appear in the foundation she had built. Small things at first: an inconsistency in her explanation to a nurse, a medication adjustment she could barely justify, a strange tension in her voice when Michael asked a question she didn't anticipate. These were tiny fractures, but Willow felt them widening beneath her feet. At night, when she finally allowed herself to stand alone in the hallway outside Drew's room. She sometimes felt the tremor of panic press against her ribs. What if Drew recovered enough to blink with intention? What if he could communicate, even in the smallest way? What if doctors saw progress? What if someone noticed her watching him not with concern, but with the wary vigilance of a captor monitoring her prisoner? The fear almost suffocated her sometimes, but then she would step back into the room, see him lying there helpless, and the fear would transform into something else, an intoxicating reminder that she still had the upper hand, that she still controlled the story. The danger was growing, but so was her attachment to this twisted sense of control. Willow began to obsessively plan, rehearsing conversations in her mind, adjusting lies before they were even spoken, manipulating timelines so that no one could question her involvement in anything. She started tracking Michael's schedule, anticipating when he might show up unexpectedly. She monitored Nina's behavior, ready to deflect suspicion with a tearful confession or a fabricated moment of vulnerability. She watched Jason more carefully than anyone else, knowing that he alone possessed the instincts capable of unraveling her carefully constructed mask. Every choice she made, every breath she took, was part of an elaborate dance she could not afford to misstep. Meanwhile, Drew remained locked inside his unmoving body, forced to witness her unraveling with a clarity that tormented him. He saw the wildness behind her eyes, the jittery energy that pulsed through her when she paced the room, the moments when her facade slipped and revealed the terror beneath her cruelty. He knew she was losing control, not just over him but over herself, and he knew that as she spiraled deeper, the danger would only escalate. Willow no longer seemed driven solely by revenge. She was driven by the fear of losing everything she had built, the fear that one day the world would see her for who she had become. And in that fear, Drew realized, lay the greatest threat of all. Because a desperate Willow was unpredictable. A desperate Willow was lethal. What Willow did not know, what she could not imagine, was that someone had already begun to sense the truth. A missed detail, a strange comment, a tremor in her voice. The suspicion was forming, faint but unmistakable, and when it reached the right person, the storm would finally turn. Because control is an illusion, and even Willow brilliant, broken, ruthless Willow cannot keep the world blind forever. And once the first thread is pulled, the entire tapestry of lies she has woven will begin to fall apart, thread by thread, until nothing remains but the truth she has tried so desperately to bury, and the reckoning waiting on the other side. Scout had always been perceptive in ways that made adults uncomfortable, carrying a quiet intuition that allowed her to sense things long before anyone spoke them aloud. But nothing in her young life had prepared her for the terror that washed through her the first time. She looked into Drew's eyes after his collapse. His body was still, helpless, a prison he could not escape, but his eyes told a different story, one filled with fear, desperation, and a silent plea that Scout felt like a scream trapped inside her own chest. She noticed the tension in the room when Willow entered, the way Drew's gaze sharpened, panicked, the way his breathing changed just slightly every time she approached. At first, Scout thought it was her imagination, the way children sometimes see things adults overlook. But the longer she watched, the more undeniable the truth became. Drew was afraid of Willow, terrified, and Willow, in turn, carried a coldness that Scout had never seen before, something calculated, something sharp, something that made the air feel heavier each time she stepped closer to the bed. The realization struck Scout like a punch she couldn't breathe through. Her father wasn't just sick. He wasn't just recovering. He was being hunted, trapped by someone the family trusted, someone they believed was grieving and fragile. Scout began to replay every moment she had seen Willow before the stroke, every strange tone, every odd tension, every forced smile. The pieces began to fit together in a pattern she didn't want to accept. But the truth kept surfacing, louder and clearer each time. And once the truth had a shape, it became an obsession she could not shake. She started watching Willow the way a detective watches a suspect, quietly, from corners, unnoticed. And what she saw terrified her. Willow controlling the room. Willow adjusting Drew's equipment with unnecessary zeal. Willow whispering things that Scout could only partially hear, words that seemed to freeze Drew even more. Scout knew something terrible had happened, something no one else was seeing, and the weight of that secret pressed down on her so heavily she could barely sleep. But the moment that finally broke her was finding Drew alone one afternoon, his eyes wet, begging, pleading through sheer force of will for anyone to understand. Scout stepped closer, whispered his name, and watched tears slip from the corner of his immobilized face. That was when she knew beyond doubt, Drew wasn't just suffering, he was being tormented, and Willow was the one doing it. The fear twisted inside Scout until it became resolve. She knew she had to tell someone. She had to speak up. She had to protect her father, because no one else seemed willing or able to see the danger unfolding right in front of them. But the moment she imagined walking up to Nina or Sam or even Jason, she felt a different terror rise because Willow was unpredictable, dangerous, and far smarter than people gave her credit for. If Willow realized Scout had figured her out, what would she do? Would she silence her the way she silenced Drew? The idea clawed at Scout's throat like a physical hand squeezing. But still, the truth demanded to be spoken. Scout felt it growing inside her, a storm she could no longer contain. The nightmares began, visions of Willow standing over Drew with a syringe. Visions of Willow turning toward her with that same cold smile. Every dream ended the same way, with Scout screaming, but no sound coming out, just like Drew. She woke shaking, drenched in sweat, carrying an urgency that consumed her entire world. The moment of breaking came unexpectedly. Willow entered the room one evening, humming softly as she approached Drew's bed. She spoke gently, but those words carried a venom Scout could finally hear clearly. Willow threatened him, quietly, intimately. Drew's eyes widened, and Scout, standing in the hallway just beyond the partially open door, felt the ground shift beneath her. Her worst fear was real. Willow wasn't unstable, she was dangerous. And Drew wasn't recovering, he was being held hostage. That was the moment Scout knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. The truth inside her had grown too large, too loud, too heavy to contain. She could expose Willow. She could save Drew. She could stop the nightmare before it reached someone else, maybe Jason, maybe Michael, maybe even the children Willow claimed to love. But with that decision came another realization, colder and sharper than anything she had felt before. Once Scout spoke, once she revealed the truth, Willow would know exactly who had betrayed her. And Willow did not forgive. Willow erased problems. Willow silenced threats, which meant that by saving Drew, Scout might be condemning herself. But she stepped forward anyway, because the fear of losing her father forever was greater than the fear of Willow's retribution. And as she took that first step toward exposing the truth, a darker question hung in the air, a question that whispered through the hallways of the house, through the silence of Drew's immobilized body, through the trembling pulse of Scout's courage. When Willow realizes Scout knows everything, what will she do next?